What if the dish you've been ordering your whole life, the one you point to without even reading the description anymore, was invented not in an ancient kitchen, but in a California backroom by someone trying to survive a country that didn't want them? What if the foods that made you feel like you were glimpsing another civilization were actually a mirror, built by immigrants who studied what you wanted and gave it to you in a form you'd accept? What if the entire category of cuisine you think you know is actually one of the most creative acts of cultural reinvention in modern history, and nobody told you? Here's the truth that changes everything. Some of the most iconic Chinese foods in the world were never Chinese at all. They were born from necessity, from adaptation, from the extraordinary creativity of people who had almost nothing and built something that fed a nation. Welcome to Forgotten Food. Subscribe now, because the history you haven't been told is always more interesting than the one you were. Food number 1, fortune cookies. It's thin and pale gold, almost translucent at the edges, and it snaps between your fingers with a sound like a tiny wishbone breaking. The taste is barely there, a whisper of vanilla, more texture than flavor. And tucked inside is a slip of paper that feels like it arrived from somewhere ancient and certain. Everyone assumes fortune cookies are a tradition carried across the Pacific from China, a ritual as old as the culture itself. But here's the truth. Most historians believe fortune cookies were invented not in China, but in early 1900s California, and almost certainly by a Japanese immigrant, not a Chinese one. Makoto Hagiwara, the designer of San Francisco's Japanese tea garden, is widely credited with serving folded cookies containing small notes to visitors around 1914. Chinese-American bakers in Los Angeles adopted and modified the concept around the same period. And when Japanese-American businesses were shuttered by internment orders during World War II, Chinese-American bakeries scaled up production almost entirely, inheriting by default the cookie's permanent identity. Here's the part that stops people cold. Fortune cookies are virtually unknown inside China itself. When a fortune cookie company attempted to market them in Hong Kong in 1993, locals received them as an exotic American curiosity, not a homecoming. Sometimes a culture doesn't export a tradition. It inherits one. And the inheritance becomes indistinguishable from the origin. Food number 2, chop suey. It arrives steaming and tangled. Celery, bean sprouts, and meat in a glossy brown sauce that coats everything it touches. The smell is savory and faintly sweet, almost caramelized at the edges. And it is, in almost every visual sense, the platonic image of Chinese food in the American imagination. Most people assume chop suey is a rustic Chinese peasant dish that crossed the Pacific Ocean intact, authentic in every stir-fried bite. But here's the truth. Chop suey, the name likely derived from the Cantonese tizap siui, meaning mixed scraps, was assembled in America, not China. Chinese laborers who helped construct the Transcontinental Railroad in the 1860s cooked survival food from whatever scraps were available in the camps along the route. By the 1890s, restaurants in New York and San Francisco were serving formalized versions to non-Chinese customers hungry for something exotic and inexpensive. It was never a dish anyone in Guangdong province sat down to eat on a Tuesday evening. Here's the fact that genuinely surprises people. By 1900, chop suey had become so fashionable in American cities that non-Chinese restaurant owners began opening counterfeit establishments specifically to serve it. American entrepreneurs profiting from a dish invented by Chinese immigrants who were themselves inventing it under pressure, on the fly, with almost nothing. The dishes that define a culture are often the ones that culture made with nothing, for people who weren't watching. Food number 3, General Tso's chicken. It's lacquered and crimson, each piece fried to a shatter and draped in a sauce that hits sweet, sour, and hot in rapid succession. The smell alone, that dark caramelized chili glaze, stops a conversation. It is unapologetically bold in a way that feels ancient, as if it were refined over centuries in a province famous for its heat. Everyone assumes General Tso's chicken is a centuries-old recipe from Hunan, named in honor of a military hero whose culinary legacy survived alongside his battlefield one. But here's where this story gets interesting. Chef Peng Chang Kuei, a Hunanese cook who fled to Taiwan following the Chinese Civil War, invented this dish in Taipei in the early 1950s. It was originally far more savory and far less sweet, bearing his own distinctive signature. When Peng brought the recipe to New York City in the 1970s, American palates reshaped it dramatically, amplifying the sweetness until it bore only a family resemblance to his original. General Tso, the real Zuozongtong, was a genuine 19th century military figure who almost certainly never tasted the dish that carries his name. Here's the detail that reframes everything. When food researchers brought General Tso's chicken to Hunan province to show locals their so-called traditional dish, the people there had never heard of it. A cuisine's most famous ambassador had never once been home. Reinvention is not betrayal. It is survival wearing a borrowed name. Food number 4, crab rangoon. The shell is fried to a crisp golden point, and when you bite through it, the inside is warm cream cheese and imitation crab. Rich, tangy, impossible to stop eating. It is comfort food sealed inside a wonton wrapper, and it appears on virtually every American Chinese takeout menu from Maine to Montana. Most people assume crab rangoon is a Southeast Asian coastal delicacy, named after the city of Rangoon, because that is genuinely where it comes from. But here's the truth. Crab rangoon was invented at Trader Vic's, a tiki-themed restaurant in San Francisco. Most accounts placing its creation around 1956. Victor Bergeron, the showman restaurateur known as Trader Vic, is credited with developing the dish, naming it after a foreign city to lend it an exotic colonial-era mystique that had nothing to do with actual Burmese cooking or cuisine of any kind. The filling used cream cheese, a thoroughly Western ingredient, and the crab was frequently artificial. It was a tiki bar fantasy dressed in wonton clothing and given a passport it never earned. Here's the part that stops people cold. You will not find crab rangoon in Myanmar. You will not find it in any Southeast Asian country in any recognizable form. It exists almost exclusively in the United States. A dish named after a foreign city that the foreign city has never once claimed. The most convincing fictions are the ones that taste real enough that nobody checks. Food number 5, beef and broccoli. The broccoli is vivid green, almost startlingly so against the dark oyster sauce glaze. The beef is thin sliced and tender, and the whole dish has a clean, slightly sweet savoriness that feels wholesome in a way most takeout items don't manage. Most people assume beef and broccoli is a staple of Chinese home cooking, something so universal in Chinese cuisine that its recipe must stretch back centuries. But here's the truth. The obstacle isn't the preparation technique. It's the vegetable itself. Broccoli is a Mediterranean crop, developed in southern Italy and not widely cultivated across China until the 20th century. Chinese immigrants in California, cooking for American customers in the late 1800s and early 1900s, began substituting the Chinese vegetable gai lan, a related but distinctly different leafy green, with broccoli, which American diners actually recognized and were willing to eat. The dish was a translation, not a transplant, built specifically to bridge a gap between what Chinese cooks knew and what American customers would accept. Here's the fact that genuinely delights people. Traditional Chinese cooking does use a beef and greens combination, but the greens were never broccoli. The version the entire world now orders by name was assembled because a foreign vegetable happened to be more familiar to the customer standing on the other side of the counter. Every great cuisine contains a vegetable it never grew, a concession to a stranger that became a signature. Food number 6, egg foo young. It arrives golden brown and puffy, somewhere between an omelet and a fritter, sitting in a rich brown gravy that soaks into every edge. The inside is soft and eggy with scattered vegetables and shrimp or pork, filling and familiar, with a warmth that feels almost like something your grandmother might have made, regardless of your grandmother's actual origin. Most people assume egg foo young is a classic Cantonese dish, something every family in Guangdong province has cooked in some recognizable form for generations. But here's where this story gets interesting. There is a Cantonese dish called foo young egg slices. Delicate, lightly cooked, and genuinely elegant. What America calls egg foo young is not that dish. Chinese immigrants in 19th century California, working in restaurant kitchens for non-Chinese clientele, created a thicker, pan-fried version that could be prepared quickly, cheaply, and consistently across a busy service. The brown gravy, the element most American diners consider essential and most authentically Chinese, has no counterpart in the Cantonese original whatsoever. It was added entirely for the American table. Here's the detail that genuinely surprises people. The thing that feels most traditional about American egg foo young is the part that was invented last. What we experience as the taste of the original is, in fact, the final layer of adaptation, the farthest point from the source. Authenticity is a moving target. What we inherit is rarely what was sent. Food number 7, sesame chicken. It's the color of dark honey. Each piece glossed in a sauce that is sweet and nutty and clinging, with sesame seeds scattered across the top like a finishing thought. The crust has a slight crunch before the meat gives way. Tender and completely surrendered to the glaze. It tastes, unmistakably, like Chinese food. Specific, confident, like it came from somewhere with a very clear idea of what it was doing. Most people assume sesame chicken is a regional Chinese classic rooted in a specific province's culinary identity, a recipe that traveled the world because it was perfected there first. But here's the truth. Sesame chicken, as Americans know, it was engineered inside the American Chinese restaurant industry in the second half of the 20th century, built to satisfy a customer base that wanted sweetness, visual richness, and familiarity in equal measure. It is distinct from Chinese sesame-based dishes, which tend towards savory, cold, or noodle-based applications, with no battered protein in sight. There is no founding province, no named creator on record. Sesame chicken is a collective invention, assembled across thousands of restaurant kitchens over decades, each adjustment pulling it further from anything a regional Chinese cook would recognize. Here's the part that stops people cold. Sesame chicken is consistently one of the top 5 most ordered dishes across more than 40,000 American Chinese restaurant establishments nationwide, and it has no traceable hometown, no founding recipe, and no Chinese culinary tradition willing to claim it as kin. Some foods are not from a place. They are from a hunger, and hunger is its own kind of homeland. Food number 8, mu shu pork. It arrives as an assembly project. Thin, pale pancakes. A tangle of shredded pork and cabbage and egg glistening in hoisin so dark it's nearly black. A small dish of the sauce on the side. You build it yourself at the table, folding the pancake around the filling, and the first bite is warm and sweet and faintly smoky in a way that feels genuinely collaborative. Most people assume mu shu pork is an authentic northern Chinese dish, served in America essentially unchanged. A rare case of culinary fidelity across the Pacific. But here's where this story gets interesting. There is a genuine northern Chinese dish called mu shi ru, with real and documented roots in Shandong cuisine. But the American version, which grew popular through Chinese restaurants in New York beginning in the 1960s, was substantially reworked for a new audience. The original uses day lily buds and wood ear mushrooms as defining ingredients. The American version replaced or eliminated these, added cabbage, sweetened the hoisin considerably, and presented the dish in a format designed for a customer who had never built a wrap at a restaurant table before. Here's the fact that reframes everything. day lily buds, an ingredient essential to the character of the original Shandong dish, are so absent from the American version that most American diners have never encountered them in any culinary context at all. An ingredient that defined the original became optional, then marginal, then forgotten entirely. The version that survives the crossing is never the whole story, only the part the new shore was ready to receive. Food number 9, sweet and sour pork. It arrives in thick, battered cubes, vivid, orange-red in a sauce that is aggressively sweet and just sharp enough to cut through the richness. There are pineapple chunks and bell peppers in colors so saturated they look designed rather than grown. It is loud food, loud in color, loud in flavor, announcing itself immediately and without apology. Most people assume sweet and sour pork is a Chinese classic, timeless and unchanged, the same dish that has always appeared in Guangdong households and now appears on every takeout menu on Earth. But here's the truth. The sweet-sour flavor combination does have genuine roots in Cantonese cooking. That much is real and old. But the globalized version was substantially reconstructed in port city Chinese restaurants, catering to Western merchants and sailors in the 19th century, then exaggerated further as it traveled to Britain, Australia, and the United States over the following decades. Pineapple, now inseparable from the dish in the Western imagination, is not a traditional Cantonese ingredient. Bell peppers, another fixture, are a New World vegetable that arrived in China through trade routes. The dish assembled its most recognizable elements after it left. Here's the detail that stops people cold. The neon orange sauce that defines Western sweet and sour pork gets its color in many commercial kitchens from artificial dye, not from any natural ingredient in the recipe. The most visually distinctive element of the dish was added by food manufacturers in countries that had never seen the original version. A dish that travels far enough stops belonging to its origin and starts belonging to its journey. Food number 10, egg rolls. It's thick and golden, sealed at both ends, fried hard enough that it crackles audibly when you bite through it. The filling is dense, cabbage, pork, maybe shrimp, and the whole thing holds together like something engineered to survive a commute. Dip it in duck sauce, and you have an object that feels, in its bones, like a definitive statement about what Chinese food is. Most people assume the egg roll is simply what Chinese spring rolls are called in America. The same food, the same history, the same recipe in a slightly different wrapper. But here's the truth. The Chinese spring roll is a delicate, thin-skinned creation, often served fresh or only lightly fried, with a wrapper so fine you can nearly see through it to the filling inside. The American egg roll, with its thick wheat and egg wrapper and dense fried interior, is a categorically different creation. Developed in Chinese-American restaurant kitchens in the early to mid-20th century. Food historians point to Chinese-American restaurants in New York as the most likely site of its evolution, a dish engineered for a customer base that wanted something substantial, portable, and deeply fried. The two foods share a concept. They do not share a recipe. Here's the fact that genuinely surprises people. If you walked into a restaurant in Shanghai and described what you know as an egg roll, they would not know what you were asking for. The most recognizable Chinese appetizer in America is an American original. Invented in New York, perfected in takeout containers, consumed by the billions in a country that never tasted the dish it believes it remembers. The copy doesn't just outlive the original. It becomes the only version most people ever love. 10 dishes. 10 stories of people who crossed oceans, built kitchens from almost nothing, and fed a country that didn't fully understand them, using whatever that country put in front of them. These foods were never inauthentic. They were adaptive. An adaptation, done with enough skill and enough need, becomes its own tradition, its own lineage, its own kind of truth. The next time you open a takeout container, you are not just eating food. You are eating history. The specific, complicated, survival-shaped history of people who figured out how to be understood in a language they were still learning. If this episode changed how you see your menu, hit like and subscribe to Forgotten Food. Tell us in the comments which of these surprised you the most.